The first thing I noticed when I woke up was that my wedding ring was gone. Not loose on my finger. Not resting beside the hospital bed. Gone. For 3 months, machines had been breathing beside me while my husband quietly erased every sign that I had ever existed. He emptied our accounts. Sold the house my father left me. And moved another woman into the life we had built together. The doctors called my recovery a miracle. Daniel would eventually call it something else. A catastrophic mistake. Because while I had been lying unconscious, he had taken everything he thought made me powerful. What he failed to understand was that the most dangerous thing I owned had never been the house, the money, or the company. It was my patience. And the moment I opened my eyes, I began using it. There was a soft clicking sound somewhere to my left. Slow. Mechanical. Unhurried. I tried to turn toward it, but my neck refused to move. My body felt as though someone had filled it with wet sand. Even breathing required negotiation. The ceiling above me was pale gray, divided into square panels. One of the fluorescent lights flickered near the door. I stared at it for several seconds before I understood that I was in a hospital. Then the memories came back in broken pieces. Rain against the windshield. A white delivery truck drifting across the center line. My hands tightening around the steering wheel. The scream of metal. And Daniel's voice from earlier that morning, telling me not to drive because I looked tired. I tried to say his name. Only air came out. A nurse entered carrying a plastic cup and a folded towel. She was perhaps 60, with silver hair tied neatly at the back of her neck. When she saw my eyes open, she stopped so suddenly that the cup slipped from her hand. Water spread across the floor. For one strange second, neither of us moved. Then she pressed the emergency button beside my bed. "Evelyn?" Her voice trembled. "Mrs. Hart, can you hear me?" I blinked. She leaned closer, watching my face as if I might disappear again. "You're safe," she said. "You're at St. Catherine's Hospital. My name is Ruth." My lips felt cracked. "Daniel." It came out as barely more than a breath. The nurse's expression changed. Not dramatically. Just enough. Her eyes lowered for a moment before she reached for my hand. "The doctor is coming." "Daniel," I repeated. She squeezed my fingers but did not answer. That silence frightened me more than the machines. Dr. Patel arrived with 2 other nurses. He asked me to follow his finger with my eyes. He asked whether I knew my name, the year, the city. I answered slowly. Evelyn Hart. 58 years old. Boston. Then he told me I had been unconscious for 87 days. 3 months. The number did not feel real. It belonged to someone else's life. He explained the brain swelling, the fractured ribs, the surgeries, the infection they had nearly lost me to during the 4th week. "You were very fortunate," he said. I looked at the empty chair beside the window. A brown vinyl chair with no coat hanging over it. No coffee cup. No newspaper. No trace of anyone having waited there. "Where is my husband?" The doctor glanced at Ruth. That glance lasted less than a second. It told me everything they were trying not to say. "Mr. Hart was contacted this morning," Dr. Patel said carefully. "We left a message informing him of your change in condition." "This morning?" My voice scraped painfully through my throat. "He doesn't know I'm awake?" "We haven't spoken to him directly yet." I looked at the chair again. There should have been something there. Daniel always left things behind. Receipts in his pockets. Coffee cups in the car. His reading glasses in every room of the house. If he had been visiting me, that chair would have carried evidence of him. When was he last here? No one answered immediately. Ruth adjusted the blanket over my legs, though it did not need adjusting. Finally, Dr. Patel spoke. Several weeks ago. How many? His face softened. Almost 7. 7 weeks. I had been lying between life and death, and my husband had stopped coming. My first instinct was to defend him. That is the embarrassing truth about betrayal. Before your mind accepts that someone has abandoned you, it begins manufacturing excuses on their behalf. Maybe Daniel had become ill. Maybe he could not bear to see me connected to machines. Maybe the doctors had misunderstood. Maybe he had been visiting at night. Maybe he was sitting in the parking lot right now, crying in the privacy of his car. I held on to those possibilities because the alternative was too large to face while I could not even lift my own head. He must be traveling, I whispered. Ruth looked away. Over the next 4 days, I learned how humiliating survival could be. A physical therapist named Melissa helped me sit upright. My muscles shook from the effort. The first time my feet touched the floor, I cried without making a sound. Not from pain. From the shock of realizing that my legs no longer remembered me. I needed help drinking water. Help washing my hair. Help walking 6 steps to the bathroom. Each small task stripped away another layer of the person I had been before the accident. Before the coma, I had managed a 40-person architectural consulting firm. I had negotiated contracts across polished conference tables while men twice my size tried to interrupt me. Now a young nurse had to fasten the buttons on my hospital gown because my fingers would not cooperate. Daniel still had not called. Every morning, I asked whether he had returned the hospital's messages. Every morning, the answer was no. On the 5th day, Ruth brought me my personal belongings. There was very little. A damaged leather handbag. My driver's license. A cracked pair of glasses. 1 pearl earring. My phone was missing, along with my wallet and wedding ring. The police listed the ring among the items recovered from the accident, Ruth said. Your husband signed for your valuables when they transferred you from intensive care. The words settled slowly. Daniel had taken my ring. He had taken my phone. But he had left me. I asked to use the hospital telephone. My fingers trembled as I dialed his number from memory. The call went directly to voicemail. You've reached Daniel Hart. I'm unavailable right now. Please leave a message. His voice sounded exactly the same. Warm. Professional. Completely untouched by what had happened to me. Daniel. I stopped because my throat had closed. I could hear the hospital corridor behind me. Rubber shoes against the floor. A meal cart rattling past the doorway. It's Evelyn. The absurdity of introducing myself to my own husband nearly broke me. I'm awake. I waited 6 hours. Then 12. By the following morning, he had not called. That was when fear began replacing confusion. I asked Ruth whether I could access my email from the hospital computer. She brought me a tablet and helped connect it to the guest network. My usual password did not work. Neither did the backup password. When I tried to recover the account, the verification number ended in digits I did not recognize. Daniel had changed the recovery information. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. Maybe it's a security issue, Ruth said gently. No. It was the first time I said the word with certainty. No, it isn't. My business email had been deactivated. My cloud storage rejected my login. Even the phone number connected to my banking profile had been changed. One account after another refused to recognize me. It felt as though I were standing outside my own house, pressing my face to the glass while someone moved through the rooms wearing my clothes. I asked Ruth to help me call my bank. The representative requested my account number, which I did not have. After 20 minutes of identity verification, she placed me on hold. When she returned, her voice had become guarded. Mrs. Hart, both joint accounts were closed approximately 5 weeks ago. Closed? The balances were transferred. To where? I'm unable to disclose information regarding the receiving institution. They were my accounts. They were jointly held accounts, ma'am. How much was transferred? There was a pause. Just over $412,000. The hospital room became very quiet. That money included my personal savings. My mother's inheritance. The reserve fund I had built over 27 years of work. Was the transfer made by my husband? I'm unable to confirm. You already confirmed it was a joint account. Mrs. Hart, I understand that this is distressing. No, I said, still staring at the empty chair. I don't think either of us understands it yet. That afternoon, I asked for a social worker. Her name was Margaret. She wore a navy blue cardigan and carried a thick folder against her chest. She explained that the hospital had repeatedly contacted Daniel regarding discharge planning. He had replied once, nearly a month earlier, saying he was unable to assume responsibility for my care. The sentence was written in formal language. Unable to assume responsibility. It sounded like something a lawyer had told him to say. Did he give a reason? I asked. Margaret hesitated. He stated that your marital situation had changed. My fingers tightened around the edge of the blanket. I was unconscious. I understand. How does a marriage change when one person cannot speak? Margaret lowered herself into the chair beside my bed. There are legal services we can connect you with. I don't need a lawyer. Even as I said it, I knew it was not true. What I need is to go home. Her silence returned. The same careful silence I had seen from Ruth and Dr. Patel. What? I asked. Margaret placed the folder on her lap. Mrs. Hart, the address listed in your medical records is no longer associated with you or your husband. That's impossible. The hospital attempted to send documents there. They were returned by the new owners. I heard myself laugh. It was a small, dry sound. Our home isn't rented. I own it. Margaret's face remained still. Property records indicate that it was sold 6 weeks ago. For a moment, I forgot to breathe. The house had belonged to my father. He purchased it in 1978, when the neighborhood was still filled with small grocers and young families. He rebuilt the porch himself. He carved my initials beneath the kitchen windowsill on my 10th birthday. When he died, he left the house to me. Not to Daniel. To me. I had lived there before my marriage. I had paid the taxes. I had refinanced it to start my business, then spent 12 years paying the loan back. Daniel knew exactly what that house meant. How could he sell it? Margaret carefully opened the folder. I don't know the details. But the transaction is public record. She slid a printed page across the bed tray. My eyes moved slowly over the document. Property address. Sale date. Purchase price. Seller, Evelyn Margaret Hart. My name. My signature. A signature I had supposedly written 42 days after entering a coma. I looked at the curved letters for a long time. They were close to mine. Very close. But Daniel had made one mistake. For years, I had signed legal documents using my middle initial followed by a small slash beneath the final letter of my surname. It was a habit I learned from my father. The slash was missing. Someone had practiced my signature. But they had practiced it from the version printed on my driver's license. My legal signature was different. What was the sale price? I asked. Margaret pointed to the number. $1,850,000. The house was worth more. Considerably more. Daniel had not simply sold it. He had rushed. Rushed sales leave trails. Lower valuations. Unusual closing dates. Buyers who ask fewer questions because they are being offered something they know they should not have. For the first time since waking, my mind moved faster than my fear. Who bought it? A limited liability company. What company? Northbridge Residential Holdings. The name meant nothing to me. But the registered representative did. Claire Mercer. I read it twice. Then a third time. Claire had been my business partner for 11 years. She had stood beside me at my father's funeral. She had brought soup to the house when I had pneumonia. She had been sitting across from me at lunch 2 hours before the accident. She knew I was driving home alone. And she knew the road I always took. A cold pressure formed beneath my ribs. Not suspicion. Not yet. Something quieter. The instinctive recognition that the story I had been given was missing its most important page. Do you know her? Margaret asked. Yes. My voice sounded calmer than I felt. She was my closest friend. That evening, I convinced Melissa to help me walk to the visitor lounge. It had large windows overlooking the hospital entrance. Rain streaked the glass, turning the city lights into long silver lines. I sat wrapped in a gray blanket and watched families arrive carrying flowers, balloons, paper cups, and overnight bags. Life continued below me with insulting normality. A father lifted a sleeping child from the back seat of a car. An elderly couple walked beneath one umbrella, their shoulders pressed together. A young man ran through the rain with a bouquet hidden beneath his coat. I had spent 32 years believing Daniel would be the person running toward me. Instead, he had sold the place where I expected to find him. Ruth found me there after sunset. She placed a cup of tea on the table. I'm sorry, she said. It was the first honest sentence anyone had offered me all day. I nodded. I keep thinking I should be crying. You don't have to. I loved him. I know. No, I said quietly. I loved the person I thought he was. I don't know who took my ring and signed my name. Ruth sat beside me. What are you going to do? Below us, a black car pulled into the hospital driveway. For one foolish moment, my heart rose. But the driver was not Daniel. I watched a stranger step out and open an umbrella. I'm going to get strong enough to leave this place. And then? I looked at my reflection in the darkened window. My face was thinner. My hair had been cut around the surgical scar. Purple shadows rested beneath my eyes. I barely recognized the woman staring back. Perhaps that was useful. Then I'm going to find out what happened while I was asleep. 2 days later, I received a call from a blocked number. Ruth placed the telephone in my hand and quietly left the room. I answered without speaking. For several seconds, all I heard was breathing. Then Daniel's voice. Evelyn. He sounded frightened. Not relieved. Not emotional. Frightened. You're awake. Yes. Another silence. I could hear faint music behind him. Piano, low and elegant. The clinking of glass. He was not in an office. He was not alone. The hospital said your recovery was uncertain, he continued. They told me you might never come back? I didn't mean it like that. How did you mean it? He exhaled slowly. I was trying to make practical decisions. You sold my house. We should discuss this in person. You transferred our money. There were expenses. $400,000 in expenses? You don't understand what the last 3 months have been like. I looked down at the scars running along my wrist. No, I said. I suppose I don't. His tone softened, but it was the softness he used during business negotiations. A voice designed to calm the other person while he searched for an advantage. You need to focus on recovering. Where are you living? That isn't important right now. Are you with Claire? The music disappeared. Perhaps someone had closed a door. Daniel did not answer. That was the moment I understood that silence could be a confession. When are you coming to see me? I asked. I can't today. Tomorrow? I have several things to handle first. What things? Legal things. The last remaining warmth left my body. He was not calling because he loved me. He was calling because he had discovered the dead woman had opened her eyes. You sound different, he said. I've had a difficult week. Evelyn, please don't do anything impulsive. I almost smiled. For 29 years, Daniel had mistaken my calmness for obedience. He believed that because I did not shout, I could not be dangerous. I can barely walk, I told him. What could I possibly do? His breathing became easier. That was all the confirmation I needed. He believed I was helpless. I decided to let him. I'll call again, he said. Daniel? Yes? Did you take my wedding ring? He did not answer. The line went dead. I remained still for several minutes after the call ended. Then I pressed the nurse button. Ruth appeared in the doorway. Could you bring me the property document again? I asked. Of course. And I need the name of the hospital's legal assistance office. She studied my face. You're ready to speak with them? No. I looked toward the rain moving across the window. I'm ready to listen. Before that night, I had believed survival meant waking up. I was wrong. Waking up was only the moment my body returned. Survival began when I understood that Daniel and Claire were expecting a weak, confused woman to leave the hospital and beg them for answers. So I gave them exactly what they wanted. I stopped calling. I stopped asking mutual friends about them. And when the hospital offered to notify Daniel about my transfer to a rehabilitation center, I declined. As far as he knew, I remained fragile, isolated, and completely dependent on strangers. But behind that hospital door, I was learning something neither of them had planned for. The forged sale document was not the only irregularity connected to my name. There were loans. Corporate guarantees. A new life insurance policy. And one financial document dated 3 days before my accident. It carried Daniel's signature, Claire's signature, and a handwritten note discussing what would happen if I failed to come home. That note changed everything. And before I reveal what it said, tell me this. If someone stole your entire life while you were unable to defend yourself, would you confront them immediately? Or would you let them believe they had already won? The handwritten note was attached to a bridge loan application submitted in my company's name. It was not long. Only 3 sentences. But sometimes 3 sentences are enough to expose the shape of a betrayal. Evelyn's condition is expected to remain unresolved. Control of Hart and Mercer can transfer once incapacity is formally established. If she fails to return, the insurance proceeds will stabilize the acquisition. I read it twice. Then I asked the hospital attorney to read it aloud. Her name was Naomi Levin. She was small, sharply dressed, and spoke with the careful precision of someone who had spent years watching people lie under oath. She did not react dramatically. That made the moment worse. Naomi removed her glasses, placed them beside the file and folded her hands. Where did this come from? The hospital financial advocate found it among documents connected to a credit inquiry in my name. Did you authorize this loan? No. Did you authorize any transfer of control in your company? No. Did you discuss an insurance policy with your husband or Ms. Mercer? No. Naomi looked down at the signatures again. The note does not prove they caused your accident. I didn't say it did. You were thinking it. I looked toward the rehabilitation garden beyond the window. 2 patients were walking slowly between bare maple trees. One man pushed a metal frame in front of him while his wife matched every step. I'm thinking they were preparing to profit from my absence before they knew whether I would recover. That, Naomi said, is a much safer conclusion. Safer. It was an interesting word. Nothing about my situation felt safe. But Naomi was teaching me the difference between what I felt and what I could prove. That distinction became the foundation of everything I did next. I was transferred to a rehabilitation center under my maiden name. Not secretly. Not illegally. The staff simply used the name printed on my original birth records after Naomi confirmed I had never formally changed it on several private documents. To Daniel, I became difficult to locate. He called the hospital twice after my transfer. Both times, he was told I had been discharged. He did not contact the police. He did not report me missing. He did not ask our neighbors whether I had returned home. He simply stopped calling. That hurt more than I expected. There is a humiliating part of grief where you still want the person who betrayed you to prove that the betrayal was incomplete. Some small part of me wanted Daniel to search. To panic. To leave messages saying he was sorry. Instead, his silence confirmed that my disappearance solved a problem for him. So I made myself stop waiting. Every morning at 7, I practiced standing without support. At 8, I walked the length of the therapy room. At 10, I worked with weighted rings to rebuild the strength in my fingers. My body resisted me in small, infuriating ways. A coffee cup felt too heavy. Buttons became puzzles. My left knee buckled when I was tired. Some afternoons, I returned to my room and slept for 3 hours from the effort of taking a shower. Recovery was not heroic. It was repetitive. Unattractive. Lonely. It smelled of disinfectant, rubber mats and overcooked vegetables. It sounded like strangers grunting through pain behind thin curtains. But there was something honest about it. Each improvement belonged to me. No one could forge it. No one could transfer it. No one could sign it away. Naomi visited twice a week. She never brought good news. She brought useful news. The sale of my house had been completed using a durable power of attorney supposedly signed 8 months before the accident. The document gave Daniel authority to manage my property if I became medically incapacitated. The signature was not mine. The notary stamp belonged to a man named Leonard Pike, whose license had been suspended 2 years earlier. The witness address led to an empty storefront. Northbridge Residential Holdings had been created 12 days after my accident. Claire was listed as its manager. The purchase had been financed through a private lender connected to one of Daniel's former clients. None of it was sophisticated. It was simply buried beneath enough paperwork that no one had looked closely. They relied on speed, Naomi said. We were sitting in a private consultation room at the rehabilitation center. Rain tapped against the narrow window. They expected you to remain unconscious long enough for the transactions to settle. And if I died? The estate would have faced months of confusion. Your husband would likely have controlled most of the records. Likely? Your father's house was separate property. Your company shares were more complicated. Your will would have mattered. My will leaves my controlling shares to a charitable trust. Naomi's eyes sharpened. Does Daniel know that? Yes. Does Claire? She witnessed it. The room went quiet. Naomi wrote something in the margin of her legal pad. What? Nothing conclusive. You always say that before something terrible. She looked at me. If the trust inherited your shares, neither Daniel nor Claire would control the company after your death. But the note mentioned an acquisition. Yes. So they needed the company transferred before I died. That is one possible interpretation. What is the other? That they expected to pressure the trust after your death. I leaned back carefully, protecting my ribs. Which do you believe? Naomi capped her pen. What I believe doesn't matter yet. It frustrated me when she said things like that. Later, I understood she was protecting me from becoming reckless. Rage wants immediate movement. Evidence requires patience. The first person I contacted outside the hospital system was my former accountant, Samuel Reed. Samuel was 71 and had retired to Maine 2 years earlier. He had worked with my father before he worked with me. Daniel disliked him. Claire called him old-fashioned. I trusted him because he had once refused to approve a deduction that would have saved me $80,000. It's technically defensible, he had told me, but it smells dishonest. At the time, I had been annoyed. Now, honesty felt like a luxury. Naomi arranged the call through an encrypted legal conference line. Samuel answered on the 4th ring. Levin? It's Evelyn. There was a pause. Then I heard a chair scrape against a floor. Evelyn? Yes. Oh, my God. His voice broke. That was the first time anyone from my old life reacted as though my survival mattered more than the inconvenience it created. I closed my eyes. I'm alive, Sam. I was told, Claire said there was no meaningful brain activity. She said the doctors had prepared Daniel for the worst. They lied. I called the hospital twice. No one told me. Daniel said visitors were being restricted. They weren't. Samuel swore softly. Then he became quiet in the way accountants become quiet when emotion gives way to calculation. What have they done? I told him about the house. The accounts. The forged power of attorney. The bridge loan. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "Do you remember the Franklin Reserve?" My mind moved backward through years of financial records. The contingency account? Yes. That was dissolved after the office expansion. No. You wanted to dissolve it. I advised against it. I opened my eyes. How much is in it? Just under $600,000. I nearly dropped the phone. That isn't possible. You stopped receiving statements when the bank merged. The account remained under the original holding entity. Does Daniel know? No. Claire? She signed one annual disclosure acknowledging the entity existed, but the account number was redacted. She assumed it had no active assets. Why didn't you tell me? I did. Repeatedly. You told me to simplify the paperwork and then ignored 3 emails. Despite everything, I laughed. The sound startled me. Samuel laughed too, briefly. For one moment, I was not a betrayed wife or a hospital patient. I was simply myself again, being corrected by an old man who had saved me from my own impatience. Can they access it? I asked. Not without you, me, and the original corporate seal. Where is the seal? In my safe. I covered my mouth with one hand. $600,000 would not restore everything. But it gave me choices. And choices are the first form of power. Samuel agreed to return to Boston. He came 3 days later wearing a brown wool coat and carrying an old leather briefcase. When he entered the rehabilitation center, he stood in the doorway as if he was afraid to approach. I had lost nearly 30 pounds. My hair was shorter. A thin scar curved above my temple. He looked older too. Grief had hollowed the skin beneath his eyes. I should have done more, he said. You believed what they told you. I should not have believed Daniel. Neither should I. He sat beside me and opened the briefcase. Inside were account records, corporate documents, and a small brass stamp wrapped in cloth. My father's company seal. He placed it on the table between us. I kept this because your father told me never to trust a business partner who wanted everything stored digitally. That sounds like him. He also told me never to trust a man with perfectly clean shoes. I looked at Samuel's rain-spotted boots. Daniel always polished his. I noticed. The smile faded from Samuel's face. He opened a folder containing 6 months of company transactions. Claire had not simply taken temporary control of Hart and Mercer. She had been hollowing it out. Consulting fees had been paid to shell companies. Client deposits had been redirected. Equipment had been leased from businesses tied to Daniel. Several long-term contracts had been terminated, then quietly reassigned to a new company called Mercer Strategic Design. She is moving the clients, I said. Samuel nodded. Your company's revenue is being transferred while its liabilities remain. And Daniel? He received advisory payments from 3 of the shell companies. How much? $1.2 million. I looked at the number. My marriage had apparently been sold in installments. Why would Claire share that much with him? Samuel turned another page. Because he helped her obtain your voting rights. He showed me a board resolution dated 5 weeks after the accident. It stated that I had been declared permanently incapacitated by 2 independent physicians. The resolution appointed Claire interim chief executive and transferred my voting authority to Daniel as my legal representative. The physicians' names were real. Their signatures were not. They forged medical certifications, I said. Yes. Wouldn't the board question them? Claire scheduled an emergency meeting. Only 3 directors attended. I appointed 7. 2 were told it had been postponed. 1 was overseas. 1 never received notice. And the 3 who attended? Claire, Daniel, and Martin Cole. Martin was the private lender who had financed the purchase of my house. The circle was closing. Not into a perfect conspiracy. Real conspiracies are rarely perfect. They are messy arrangements between greedy people who believe everyone else is too distracted to compare notes. They didn't expect scrutiny, Samuel said. No. I touched the edge of the forged resolution. They expected a funeral. Naomi wanted to move immediately. She proposed filing an emergency injunction to freeze the company accounts, challenge the house sale, and notify federal investigators about the forged financial documents. Every reasonable person in the room agreed with her. I did not. We were meeting in Naomi's office 2 weeks after my transfer from the hospital. I had graduated from a walker to a cane, though my left leg still dragged slightly when I was tired. Samuel sat near the window. Naomi stood behind her desk. You have enough evidence to stop further losses, she said. To stop some of them. That is the purpose of an injunction. And the moment we file, Daniel and Claire know exactly what we have. They already know you're alive. They know I woke up. They do not know I understand the structure. Naomi's jaw tightened. This is not a game. I know. Then stop treating it like one. Her words landed harder than she intended. I looked down at my hands. I spent 3 months unable to move while they dismantled my life. I am not trying to entertain myself. I didn't mean. Yes, you did. The room fell silent. I took a breath before continuing. I understand the legal case. But the house, the company, and the bank transfers are parts of something larger. What do you think is larger? The timing of my accident. Samuel looked up. Naomi remained still. I continued. Claire knew the route I was taking that afternoon. Daniel told me not to drive that morning. 3 days before the crash, they signed a document discussing what would happen if I failed to return. Naomi spoke carefully. You have no evidence that the collision was intentional. I know. The truck driver was questioned. He lost control in heavy rain. Where is he? Why? I want to speak with him. That could compromise any future investigation. Then have an investigator speak with him. Naomi sat down. We can ask the police to reopen the matter if new evidence emerges. They will not reopen it because my husband forged a property document. No. So we need to know more before Daniel realizes we are looking. Samuel leaned forward. What exactly are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we freeze only what is necessary to prevent immediate loss. Quietly challenge the most recent transfers through the banks. Do not file the public property action yet. Naomi stared at me. You want them to continue believing the house sale is secure? Yes. Why? Because people become careless after they think the dangerous part is over. Naomi shook her head. That sounds satisfying. It is not necessarily wise. It is not about satisfaction. I looked at the photograph on her desk. Naomi beside a teenage girl, both wearing hiking jackets. If someone endangered your daughter, would you want to know the full truth before they realized you were coming? Her expression hardened. That is not fair. No. I held her gaze. Neither is any of this. We compromised. Naomi filed sealed fraud alerts with the banks and requested confidential preservation orders for the relevant records. Samuel reclaimed control of the Franklin Reserve using the original corporate documents. A forensic accounting team began tracing payments without contacting Claire's office directly. Nothing appeared in public court records. No one served Daniel. No one contacted the new owners of my house. From the outside, I remained a recovering woman with no money, no home, and no plan. Daniel called me again after nearly 3 weeks of silence. This time, I answered from the small furnished apartment Naomi had helped me rent near the harbor. The apartment was on the 3rd floor of an old brick building with narrow stairs and radiators that knocked at night. It contained 1 bedroom, a small kitchen, and a window overlooking the back of a seafood restaurant. The air often smelled of salt, frying oil, and diesel from the delivery trucks. It was not beautiful. But the lease carried my name. The key belonged to me. When the phone rang, I was standing at the kitchen counter practicing how to slice an apple without losing control of the knife. Evelyn? Daniel sounded relieved that I had answered. Hello. Where are you? Recovering. I've been worried. The lie came easily to him. That surprised me. For years, Daniel had seemed uncomfortable with direct dishonesty. He preferred omission, suggestion, and selective memory. Perhaps practice had improved him. I needed space, I said. You should not be alone. I'm not. The silence on his end sharpened. Who are you with? A therapist. That was technically true. Melissa had stopped by earlier to help me navigate the stairs. I want to see you, he said. Why? Because you're my wife. You told the hospital our marital situation had changed. That was taken out of context. What was the context? You were unconscious for months. I was under enormous pressure. So you sold my house. I protected the asset. By selling it below market value to Claire? He stopped breathing for a moment. Who told you that? It is a public record. Evelyn, there are details you don't understand. I'm sure there are. We made decisions based on medical advice. Which doctors? I don't have the records in front of me. You signed a board resolution citing 2 of them. The music was gone this time. He was somewhere quiet. Perhaps his office. Perhaps the new house. I think we should involve our attorneys, he said. Why? You wanted to see me. I do. Then come alone. Another pause. When? Tomorrow. 2:00. Where? I gave him the address of a cafe near the rehabilitation center. It was public, crowded and equipped with security cameras. Naomi hated the idea. Samuel hated it more. But I needed to see Daniel's face. Paper revealed actions. Faces revealed fear. I arrived early. The cafe occupied the ground floor of an old hotel. Brass lamps cast warm circles across dark wooden tables. Outside, snow had begun falling in soft, wet flakes. I chose a seat facing the entrance. My cane rested against the chair beside me. I wore a plain navy coat and no makeup. The scar near my temple remained visible. Daniel entered at exactly 2. He had always considered punctuality a form of moral superiority. For 1 second, I almost failed to recognize him. His hair was shorter. His suit was new. He looked rested. That was what disturbed me most. While I had been learning to stand, Daniel had been sleeping well. He saw me and stopped. His expression shifted through several emotions too quickly to hide. Shock. Pity. Fear. Then warmth. He crossed the room and opened his arms as though he intended to embrace me. I lifted one hand. Please don't. He stopped. People at the surrounding tables glanced toward us. Daniel sat. His eyes moved over my face, my hands, the cane. You look alive? He looked down. I was going to say stronger. You were never very good at improvising. The corner of his mouth tightened. A waiter approached. Daniel ordered coffee. I asked for tea. For several seconds after the waiter left, neither of us spoke. Then Daniel reached across the table. I moved my hand away. Evelyn, I made mistakes. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary. I was grieving. I was not dead. The doctors gave me very little hope. So you sold the house. I needed liquidity. For what? medical bills, business obligations, legal expenses. My insurance covered the hospital. There were other costs, such as the estate you purchased with Claire. His eyes flickered. There it was. Not guilt. Calculation. How much do you know? He asked. It was the first honest question he had asked. Enough to understand that you forged my signature. I did not forge anything. The power of attorney is false. You signed it. No. You may not remember. I remember every document I have ever signed giving another person control over my property. Memory can be affected after a brain injury. He said it gently, almost kindly. The cruelty of it was extraordinary. He was trying to use my coma against my own certainty. You told the hospital I could not make decisions, I said. They asked for an assessment. You provided forged medical letters. I relied on the company's legal team. Which legal team? I don't recall. You recall enough to take $1.2 million in consulting payments. His face changed. Only slightly. But I saw it. The fear was no longer theoretical. You've spoken to Samuel. I said nothing. Daniel leaned back. He is confused. He has been retired for years. He kept excellent records. He also resented me. He distrusted you. Because he wanted to control you. I looked at him for a long moment. Daniel had always done this. He took another person's loyalty and described it as possession. He took concern and renamed it manipulation. He took my independence and treated it as a wound he needed to manage. How long? I asked. How long what? You and Claire. He looked toward the window. Snow gathered along the edge of the glass. It wasn't planned. That was not my question. We became close during the crisis. When did you sleep with her? A woman at the next table lowered her spoon. Daniel's face reddened. Evelyn. Before or after you signed my name? He leaned forward. You have no idea what it was like watching you lie there. You stopped visiting after 5 weeks. I could not keep doing it. So you moved into Claire's bed. It happened once. I almost admired the efficiency of the lie. Which once? He looked at me. What? The night before she purchased my house, or the night after? He said nothing. I understood then that their relationship had begun before the accident. Maybe months before. Maybe years. The exact date no longer mattered. The betrayal had not grown from grief. Grief had simply provided cover. The waiter placed our drinks on the table. Daniel waited until he walked away. Then his voice became lower. What do you want? There it was. No apology. No explanation. A negotiation. I want my house back. That may not be possible. Then return the full market value. The funds are committed. To what? Investments. I want my company restored. Claire has been keeping it alive. She has been transferring clients into her own business. His eyes narrowed. You've been accessing confidential records. They are my records. Not while you are medically incapacitated. I am sitting in front of you. A court may require independent evaluation. The threat was carefully wrapped. He could not force me back into a coma. So he intended to create one on paper. You're going to claim I'm incompetent, I said. I'm saying you have been through severe trauma. And if I object? Then you may prove my concern. I watched him lift his coffee cup. His hand was steady. Mine was not. That angered me until I realized the difference between us. Daniel's body had not been broken. Mine had. Shaking was not weakness. It was evidence of what I had survived. I placed both hands around my tea. Did you ever love me? He looked almost offended. Of course I did. Past tense. That isn't what I meant. You sold the kitchen where my father carved my initials. I saved what I could. You took my ring. His eyes moved toward my bare hand. I kept it safe. Where is it? He did not answer. I understood. Claire had it. Perhaps not on her finger. Not yet. But somewhere close enough for her to touch. I stood slowly. The movement required more effort than I wanted him to see. Daniel rose instinctively. Sit down, he said. Not kindly. Automatically. As if my body still belonged under his direction. I took the cane. I will contact you through counsel. Evelyn, don't do this. Do what? Turn a terrible situation into a war. I looked at the man I had slept beside for 29 years. I was unconscious, Daniel. My voice remained quiet. You began the war without me. Outside, the snow had become heavier. Naomi waited in a parked car across the street. When I entered, she looked at my face and handed me a tissue without asking why. I did not cry. I used it to wipe melting snow from my coat. Well, she asked. He plans to challenge my competence. We expected that. He admitted the relationship began during the crisis. That has little legal value. I know. You are learning. I looked through the rear window. Daniel stood beneath the hotel awning, watching the car. No, I said. I'm remembering. The forensic accountants delivered their first report 6 days later. The money Daniel and Claire had taken had not been used to build a stable future. It had been used to create the appearance of one. The new estate carried 2 mortgages. The luxury vehicles were leased. The business acquisition Daniel planned to announce depended on investor funds that had not yet been secured. Most of his personal wealth existed only in valuation documents, projected earnings, and borrowed confidence. He doesn't own a life, Samuel said. We were gathered around the small table in my apartment. He owns obligations. Naomi turned a page. The merger event is in 5 weeks. With whom? I asked. Briar and Row Development. I knew the company. They controlled commercial projects across 3 states. If the merger succeeded, Claire's new firm would absorb Hart and Mercer's remaining client contracts. My company would disappear. Daniel would become chief operating officer of the combined business. And the event? I asked. A private reception at the Northbridge estate. My house? No. The larger property they purchased after selling yours. With my money. Samuel slid a photograph across the table. It showed a white stone mansion overlooking the water. Glass walls. Terraced gardens. A circular driveway. The kind of house designed to impress people before they entered it. Claire and Daniel were hosting the merger reception there. The guest list included investors, board members, clients, and reporters from 2 business publications. They are hiring temporary staff for the event, Samuel said. Naomi looked at him sharply. Why is that relevant? Samuel placed another page beside the photograph. It was an advertisement from a private domestic staffing agency. Temporary household coordinator required. 4-week placement. Discretion essential. Previous estate management experience preferred. I read it once. Then again. Naomi saw the thought forming before I spoke. No. I haven't said anything. You don't need to. Claire has never seen me with short hair. She has known you for 11 years. I have lost 30 pounds. You have a recognizable face. The agency interviews remotely. Naomi closed the file. This is not an investigation strategy. It is a terrible television plot. Under different circumstances, I might have laughed. I would not be entering under a false identity. You would be withholding your identity. The advertisement requires discretion. I can be very discreet. You use a cane. Less every day. You are recovering from a catastrophic injury. And they are destroying the remaining evidence inside that house. We can obtain evidence legally. After they know we are looking. Naomi stood. You cannot enter their home to search private files. I know. You cannot record protected conversations. I know. You cannot remove documents. I know. Then what exactly would you accomplish? I looked at the photograph again. Daniel's new life had glass walls. People who build houses like that believe transparency is a design choice rather than a risk. I would observe. Samuel shook his head. Evelyn. Claire is moving company assets through the estate office. Daniel is meeting investors there. Their staff see who enters, what is delivered and what gets destroyed. You cannot become a housekeeper, Naomi said. No. I turned the job advertisement toward her. But I spent 7 years managing commercial properties before I started my firm. I supervised renovations, vendors, security, and staff schedules. That was 30 years ago. Organizing dishonest rich people has not changed that much. Samuel covered his mouth, hiding the beginning of a smile. Naomi did not smile. What name would you use? Evelyn Shaw. Shaw was my mother's maiden name. It appeared on my birth certificate and several old employment records. And if they recognize you? Then I leave. And if Daniel attempts to have you declared mentally unstable? Then I will have 4 weeks of employment records proving I was capable of managing his household. Naomi stared at me. That argument reached her. Not enough to convince her. Enough to make her hesitate. I dislike everything about this, she said. So do I. This cannot become personal revenge. I looked around the apartment. The cheap lamp. The medicine bottles. The cane beside my chair. It became personal when they decided my life was available for purchase. The staffing agency interviewed me 2 days later. I wore reading glasses with dark frames and styled my short hair flat against my head. No theatrical disguise. No wig. No false accent. Just clothes Claire had never seen me wear and the posture of a woman accustomed to remaining unnoticed. The interviewer asked why I had left estate management. I moved into commercial property operations. Why return now? I prefer work with clear responsibilities. That answer seemed to satisfy her. She asked about demanding employers. I listened carefully, document everything and avoid taking irritation personally. How do you handle confidential information? I do not repeat what does not concern me. That was also true. The agency contacted my references. Samuel posed as a retired property owner. Naomi refused to participate on ethical grounds, then spent an hour correcting the wording of my employment history. 3 days later, the agency called. The clients would like to meet you. My hand tightened around the phone. Both clients? The primary interview will be with Ms. Mercer. Her partner may join briefly. Partner. Not husband. Not fiancé. Perhaps Claire still preferred to keep certain possibilities open. The interview would take place at the estate. Thursday. 11 in the morning. After I ended the call, I stood beside the apartment window. Across the alley, a restaurant worker dragged empty crates through slush. My reflection hovered faintly over the glass. For months, Daniel and Claire had depended on one belief: that the woman they betrayed had disappeared. Now they were preparing to open their front door and invite her inside. The morning of the interview was clear and bitterly cold. Naomi drove me as far as the coastal road, then stopped the car beneath a row of bare trees. "You can still change your mind," she said. "I know. If anything feels wrong, leave." "I will." "Do not provoke them." "I won't." "Do not search private rooms." "I understand." "Do not become emotionally involved in their arguments." I looked at her. I was married to one of them. That is exactly why I said it. She reached into the back seat and handed me a plain canvas bag. Inside were my resume, a notebook, medication, and a small emergency phone. "No hidden recording equipment," she said. "I know." "No tracking device." "I know." "No weapon." "Naomi, I have learned not to assume." I placed the bag beside me. Her expression softened. "Evelyn, gathering evidence is not worth another injury. This is not only about evidence." "What is it about?" I looked ahead at the road curving toward the water. "I need to see who they became when they thought I was gone." Naomi remained silent. Then she nodded once. A hired car carried me the remaining distance. The Northbridge estate appeared beyond a line of cedar trees. White stone. Tall windows. Steel balconies. The ocean moved behind it in dark winter waves. Delivery vans occupied one side of the circular driveway. Gardeners worked near the hedges. 2 men carried crates of wine through a service entrance. The house was alive with preparation. Movement everywhere. Staff crossing polished floors. Florists measuring tables. A lighting company unloading equipment. Claire was not simply building a home. She was constructing a stage. I stepped from the car and adjusted my coat. My leg felt steady. My breathing did not. A young houseman opened the side door. "You're Ms. Shaw?" "Yes." "Ms. Mercer is waiting in the library." He led me through a wide hallway lined with modern paintings. Every surface reflected light. The floor. The glass staircase. The silver fixtures. There was nowhere for dust to hide. Nowhere for grief either. As we passed the main sitting room, I saw a familiar walnut cabinet positioned beneath the windows. My father's cabinet. It had stood in the dining room of my childhood home for 40 years. Claire had moved it here. On top of it sat a framed photograph of Claire and Daniel smiling beside the ocean. My husband's hand rested at her waist. My wedding ring hung from a chain around her neck. I did not stop walking. That was the first test. The houseman opened a pair of dark wooden doors. Claire stood beside a desk reviewing floral designs. Her back was toward me. She wore a cream silk blouse and tailored black trousers. Her hair was longer than I remembered. For 11 years, I had known the rhythm of her movements. The impatient tap of her finger. The slight lift of her shoulder when she disliked someone's work. The way she went silent before making a cruel observation. "Ms. Shaw is here," the houseman said. Claire turned. Her eyes met mine. For one suspended second, the entire room seemed to narrow around us. Her face lost color. The paper slipped slightly in her hand. I felt my pulse in the scar above my temple. Then Claire blinked. She looked at my glasses. My short hair. My thinner face. The cane I had brought only for appearance and safety. Recognition moved near her eyes. But it did not settle. I lowered my gaze politely. Ms. Mercer. Claire stared at me for another second. Then she smiled. Professional. Controlled. Uncertain. Please, she said. Come in. I crossed the room and sat across from her desk. The chair was upholstered in pale gray fabric. My wedding ring caught the light against her throat. Claire picked up my resume. You look familiar, she said. I let the silence remain just long enough to make her uncomfortable. I worked in Boston property management for many years. Perhaps that's it. Perhaps? She studied my face again. Then the library door opened behind me. I did not need to turn around. I recognized Daniel's footsteps before he spoke. Claire, Martin is asking about the revised. He stopped. The air changed. I watched Claire's eyes move past me. Daniel had seen my face. Unlike Claire, he knew every line of it. Every scar that had existed before the accident. Every expression I used when I was hiding pain. I turned slowly in the chair. Daniel stood in the doorway. His mouth had gone slightly open. A folder hung loose in his hand. For the first time since I had awakened, my former husband looked exactly as frightened as he should have been. Claire glanced between us. Daniel? He continued staring at me. I tilted my head with polite confusion. Have we met? Daniel's answer would determine whether I entered the house as an employee. Or left it with proof that he had recognized the woman he had tried to erase. Daniel's answer came slowly. No, he said. We haven't met. His voice was steady. His face was not. A thin pulse moved beneath his jaw as he stared at me from the library doorway. His hand tightened around the folder until the paper inside bent. Claire watched him. You're sure? Daniel finally looked away from me. Yes. She just resembles someone. I lowered my gaze with the modest discomfort of a stranger who had accidentally reminded him of a dead relative. I hope not unpleasantly, I said. Claire laughed once. Daniel did not. No, he replied. Not unpleasantly. He left without explaining why he had stopped speaking in the middle of a sentence. The folder remained crumpled in his hand. Claire waited until his footsteps disappeared before leaning back in her chair. My partner has been under considerable strain. I understand. He lost someone recently. The casual cruelty of those words nearly broke my composure. Lost someone. As though I had wandered away in a crowded station. As though he had not emptied my accounts, signed my name and placed my wedding ring around another woman's neck. I'm sorry, I said. Claire's fingers rose unconsciously toward the ring. So are we. We. That single word told me how completely she had rewritten the story. In Claire's version, she and Daniel were survivors. I was the tragedy that had brought them together. She asked me questions about vendor schedules, staff discipline, and household confidentiality. I answered without rushing. The interview lasted 26 minutes. By the end of it, Claire had stopped studying my face. Competence is a useful disguise. People begin looking at what you can do instead of wondering who you are. You are overqualified for a temporary role, she said. I need temporary work. Why? My recovery has been expensive. Her eyes moved briefly to my cane. I had learned that visible weakness made certain people more comfortable. They assumed it reduced every other kind of strength. Claire closed my resume. The house is preparing for a major business reception. I need someone who can manage vendors without requiring constant direction. I can do that. My staff are discreet. So am I. And the personal lives of the owners are not discussed outside this property. Understood. She looked at me for one final moment. You can start Monday. Daniel was waiting near the service entrance when I left. He stood with his coat open despite the wind. The ocean behind him was dark and restless. Waves struck the rocks below the property, sending white spray into the air. Evelyn. I continued walking. He caught up with me near the driveway. Stop. I turned slowly. My name is Evelyn Shaw. His eyes searched my face. Why are you doing this? Doing what? Coming here. I was invited for an interview. He glanced toward the house. Claire doesn't know. That appears to be true. She will recognize you eventually. Did you? He said nothing. A delivery van passed us, tires crunching against gravel. I lowered my voice. You told her we had never met. I was trying to protect you. From whom? From a situation you do not understand. You have used that sentence before. You should not be here. Then tell Claire who I am. His face tightened. For a second, I thought he might. But telling Claire would require him to explain why his supposedly incapacitated wife was working and asking questions. It would also force him to admit that he had concealed my recovery. He was trapped between two women he had lied to in different ways. That was not a trap I had created. I had simply stepped close enough to see it. What do you want? He whispered. I already told you. The house? The truth. You're risking your health. That concern would have been more convincing before you stole my medical records. His eyes flickered toward the security camera above the entrance. Keep your voice down. Why? Does Claire believe I died? She believes your recovery is uncertain. That is not an answer. It is the only one you're getting. I stepped closer. The cold air burned my lungs. Then I'll see you Monday. Daniel called 6 times that weekend. I did not answer. Each voicemail became less controlled. The first asked me to reconsider. The second warned that Claire was emotionally unstable. The third claimed Naomi was manipulating me. The fourth said I could damage my legal case by entering the estate. The fifth offered money. The sixth contained no offer at all. Only breathing. Then one quiet sentence. You don't know what she's capable of. I played that message twice. Daniel wanted me afraid of Claire. Claire believed Daniel had never met me. Neither of them trusted the other enough to tell the full truth. The partnership they had built for my life was already rotting from the inside. I began work at 7 on Monday morning. The service areas of the estate looked nothing like its public rooms. Behind the glass walls and polished stone were narrow hallways, humming refrigerators, storage closets and whiteboards filled with schedules. Real life happened behind unmarked doors. A cook named Lillian showed me the kitchen. She was 67, with strong arms and the calm impatience of a woman who had managed wealthy households long enough to stop being impressed by them. The owners don't eat breakfast together, she said. Mr. Hart takes coffee upstairs. Ms. Mercer eats fruit in the library and leaves most of it. Any allergies? Only to responsibility. She looked at me to see whether I would laugh. I did. Quietly. Lillian nodded, as though I had passed a small test. The household staff included 2 cleaners, a driver, a young houseman named Theo, and a gardener who avoided entering the main building whenever Daniel was home. Staff know the moral temperature of a house before guests do. They notice which doors slam, which glasses are thrown away instead of washed, which person apologizes after shouting, and which person never apologizes because they believe wages purchase forgiveness. By noon, I had learned that Claire changed floral arrangements after they had been approved. Daniel blamed staff for objects he misplaced, and neither of them knew the names of the people who cleaned their rooms. I also learned that Martin Cole visited every Wednesday after dark. He never entered through the front. I did not search drawers. I did not enter locked rooms. I did not photograph private documents. Naomi had made the legal boundaries painfully clear. Instead, I did my job. I organized invoices placed in the household office. I confirmed delivery times. I prepared meeting rooms when instructed. I documented every request made through the official scheduling system. People reveal extraordinary things to someone carrying a clipboard. They speak around staff as if furniture has developed hands. On my 3rd day, Daniel and Claire argued in the breakfast room while I measured the table for the merger dinner. "You changed the investor packet," Claire said. "I corrected it. You removed my founder protections. They were excessive. They were agreed before we understood the financing structure." "You mean before you and Martin changed it without telling me?" Daniel noticed me near the windows. His voice stopped. Claire followed his eyes. "Ms. Shaw is working," she said. "Try not to dramatize everything." Daniel stared at me. I kept the measuring tape steady. Claire gathered her papers. "The reception is in 3 weeks. If you embarrass me in front of Roe, I will end this." Daniel laughed without humor. "With what money?" She left the room. The door closed behind her. Daniel remained at the table. "You heard nothing," he said. "I heard you require seating for 24. His mouth tightened. "Claire likes you. I'm efficient." "That isn't why." I folded the measuring tape. "Why does she like me?" "She thinks you're harmless." I met his eyes. "Do you?" For once, Daniel did not answer. That afternoon, he followed me into the pantry. The room smelled of coffee beans and cedar shelving. "You need to leave before the reception," he said. "I have a contract. I will pay the remainder." "You already paid yourself with my money." His face reddened. "You think you understand the finances because Samuel showed you a few pages. He showed me enough. Samuel is protecting himself." "From what?" Daniel lowered his voice. "Your company was failing before the accident." It was the first new lie he had offered. Hart and Mercer had $7 million in signed contracts. And $12 million in future obligations. Obligations Claire approved. "You approved them too." "I was not chief executive." "No. You were merely the husband who attended every private dinner and repeated my opinions as though they were yours." His expression hardened. "You always did that." "Did what?" "Made me feel small." The accusation surprised me. Not because it was true. Because he believed it. For years, I had mistaken Daniel's admiration for security. He had praised my intelligence when it benefited him. He had celebrated my success in public. He had introduced me as the brilliant woman who had built everything herself. But admiration from an insecure person can quietly become resentment. They do not want your light extinguished. They want control of the switch. I never made you small, I said. You never let me be necessary. I loved you. I did not hire you. He looked away. That sentence hurt him. I could see it. A younger version of me might have apologized. The woman standing in the pantry did not. At the end of my first week, Naomi's investigator located the truck driver involved in my accident. His name was Peter Vale. He had not disappeared. He had moved to Vermont after losing his commercial license. The investigator interviewed him with his attorney present. Peter admitted he had been driving too fast in heavy rain. His employer had threatened to deduct his wages if he missed the final delivery window. There had been no payment from Daniel. No connection to Claire. No hidden message. No deliberate collision. The accident had been exactly what the police said it was. An exhausted man. A wet road. A terrible moment. When Naomi told me, I sat silently in her office. You look disappointed, she said. I'm relieved. You do not look relieved. I stared at the traffic moving below her window. For weeks, part of me had believed the accident would explain the scale of what followed. If Daniel had planned it, then he had always been a monster and I had simply failed to see him. The truth was more ordinary. He had not caused the truck to cross the line. He had merely visited my hospital room, looked at my unconscious body and decided my absence was useful. There was no single moment when he became evil. Only a series of decisions in which his comfort mattered more than my existence. They didn't arrange the accident, I said. No. They just prepared for my death while I was still alive. Naomi nodded. That is what the evidence supports. I felt something inside me loosen. Not forgiveness. Clarity. I no longer needed to solve an imaginary murder. I needed to expose a very real theft. The handwritten note dated 3 days before the accident had also been examined. The ink and paper were modern, but the document had been added to the loan file weeks after the crash. The date was false. Daniel and Claire had backdated it to create the appearance of an earlier succession plan. That discovery mattered. It proved intent. Not intent to harm me physically. Intent to make the theft look legitimate. Naomi used the finding to obtain sealed preservation orders for the lender's emails and internal records. Those records led to Martin. And Martin led everywhere. He had financed the house sale. He had provided the temporary loans used to purchase the estate. He had arranged the shell companies paying Daniel. He also held personal guarantees signed by Claire. The beautiful house was not hers. It was collateral. The luxury cars were not theirs. They were listed as business expenses. Even the artwork in the entrance hall had been rented for the merger reception. They are living inside a brochure, Samuel said. We were sitting at my apartment table, surrounded by files. And Martin owns the printing press. During my second week at the estate, Claire began speaking to me more often. She was not friendly. Claire had never been friendly in the simple sense. She offered intimacy the way some people offer contracts, selectively, and with conditions hidden in the margins. One evening, I found her alone in the main sitting room after the staff had left. The ocean beyond the windows was nearly black. She held a glass of wine but had not touched it. Do you have children, Evelyn? No. Were you married? Yes. What happened? My husband preferred the life he imagined after me. She looked at me sharply. I kept my attention on the seating cards. Did he leave? In a manner of speaking. Claire stared at the wine. Men like to believe loyalty is something women owe them, even after they stop offering it themselves. The hypocrisy was almost unbearable. Is that your experience? I asked. She gave a small smile. My experience is that men become most honest when they believe you have nowhere else to go. Then it is useful to keep somewhere else. Her smile disappeared. I wondered whether she was thinking about Daniel. Or Martin. Perhaps both. She touched the ring hanging from her necklace. Daniel says you remind him of his wife. So I gathered. He loved her very much. There are moments when rage arrives so cleanly that it feels like cold water. I continued arranging the cards. What happened to her? An accident. Did she die? Claire hesitated. She never truly recovered. That was how she had been telling the story. Not dead. Not alive enough to matter. A body in a room somewhere. An inconvenient half-person whose property had become available. That must be difficult, I said. It was. For him? For everyone. She lifted the glass and finally drank. I looked at my wedding ring against her skin. Is that hers? Claire's fingers closed around it. It belonged to someone in Daniel's family. Another lie. This one was personal enough to shake her voice. It's beautiful, I said. Yes. She removed her hand from the ring. It is. The merger reception grew closer. Every day brought new deliveries. Crystal glasses. Printed menus. Stage lighting. Temporary walls carrying the Breyer and Rowe logo beside the new Mercer Strategic Design emblem. Hart and Mercer appeared nowhere. My company was being erased before my eyes. The press materials described Claire as the visionary behind a decade of award-winning projects. Projects my staff had designed. Contracts I had negotiated. Buildings I had spent years bringing through permits, lawsuits, and impossible deadlines. My name survived only in a short paragraph describing the legacy consultancy absorbed during restructuring. It was like reading my own obituary written by the person wearing my ring. I sent every public document to Naomi. Public materials could be copied legally. Vendor instructions could be preserved. Meeting schedules could be recorded if they fell within my employment duties. The patterns gave investigators enough information to seek the evidence that mattered. That distinction kept me safe. I did not steal proof. I showed the law where to look. The decisive clue arrived through a printer. Daniel asked me to prepare 6 bound copies of an executive agreement for his Wednesday meeting with Martin. The file had already been sent to the household office printer. I did not open a locked folder. I did not access a private account. I simply collected the pages he had instructed me to collect. The first page named Daniel as Chief Operating Officer of the combined company. The second described his compensation. The third granted him control over certain operating accounts. The final attachment was different. It was an indemnity schedule. According to the language, Claire Mercer had personally represented that all transferred assets were legitimate and free of disputed ownership. Daniel's name did not appear on the representations. If the fraud was exposed, Claire would carry the legal liability. Daniel would claim he had relied on her disclosures. He was preparing to abandon her the same way he had abandoned me. There was another document beneath it. An option agreement transferring Daniel's interest in Northbridge Residential Holdings to Martin in exchange for a payment routed through an offshore investment fund. Claire's estate. Claire's company. Claire's future. Daniel was selling all of it before the merger had even happened. I bound the copies. Then I delivered them to his office exactly as requested. "Did you read these?" he asked. I checked the page order. That is not what I asked. You asked me to prepare complete copies. He stood behind the desk. The afternoon light made his face look older. You enjoy this? No. Watching us. I have seen very little worth enjoying. His eyes moved toward the binders. If you interfere with this merger, hundreds of people could lose their jobs. Hart and Mercer employees already lost theirs. They will be rehired after consolidation. Under Claire's name. This is business. No. Business produces value. This produces victims. He came around the desk. You think you can walk into this house and frighten me? I did not need to frighten you. I picked up the empty document box. You were frightened when I arrived. That night, Daniel and Martin met in the study. I was not in the room. I did not need to be. Theo had been instructed to bring coffee at 9. When he entered, Daniel shouted at him for interrupting and knocked one cup onto the carpet. Theo came into the kitchen pale and angry. Lillian helped him clean the burn on his wrist. They're talking about getting rid of Ms. Mercer after the party, he said. Lillian looked toward me. Did they say that? Mr. Cole said she was becoming a liability. Mr. Hart said she wouldn't see it coming. I did not ask Theo to repeat himself. I did not record him. I gave him Naomi's business card and told him he could speak with an attorney if he believed he had witnessed misconduct. He called her the next morning. By evening, Naomi had obtained his written statement voluntarily. A week later, sealed financial records confirmed what the printer documents had suggested. Daniel intended to transfer the merger proceeds, blame Claire for the fraudulent source assets, and leave the country once his payment cleared. Claire had betrayed me for a future that did not include her. For a moment, I felt something close to pity. Then I remembered the forged medical letters. Pity did not require innocence. It only required recognizing that someone had built their own trap. Briar and Row development was not as strong as its reputation suggested. Samuel discovered that the company had lost 2 major projects and was carrying significant short-term debt. The merger with Claire was not a victory. It was an emergency. They needed her client contracts and expected investment funds. Claire needed their name. Daniel needed their executive position. Martin needed the transaction to repay his loans. Every person at the table was using the others to escape a different fire. Samuel placed the company report in front of me. You cannot buy Briar and Row alone. I know. The Franklin Reserve is not enough. I know. You would require institutional backing. I know. He looked irritated. Then why are you smiling? Because I know who Henry Rowe is. Henry Rowe had founded the company with his older brother almost 40 years earlier. He was 76. He had also been one of my father's first clients. When I was 14, Henry had spent an entire afternoon at our kitchen table arguing with my father about a construction estimate. He lost the argument and hired him anyway. We contacted him through Naomi. Not as enemies. As people bringing information he needed before signing a fraudulent merger. Henry agreed to meet at his private office on a Sunday morning. He walked with 2 canes and wore a dark green sweater beneath his jacket. Age had reduced his speed but not his attention. He read the evidence summary without interrupting. When he finished, he closed the folder. My board believes Claire owns those contracts. She does not, I said. They believe Daniel has authority to transfer them. He never did. And you can prove it? Naomi placed the forged documents beside independent handwriting reports, medical records, and preserved corporate notices. Yes, she said. Henry looked at me. If I withdraw from the merger, Breyer and Rowe may not survive the year. I know. You are asking me to save your company by damaging mine. No. I slid a second folder toward him. I'm offering another transaction. Inside was a recapitalization proposal prepared by Samuel, Naomi, and a small investment group that had once backed Hart and Mercer projects. The Franklin Reserve would provide the first capital. 2 former clients would contribute additional funds. Henry would retain a minority stake and an advisory role. The new company would absorb Breyer and Rowe's legitimate operations, restore Hart and Mercer's contracts, and reject the fraudulent assets. I would become controlling chair. Henry read every page. You prepared this in 9 days? Samuel has not slept. Samuel grunted. Henry turned to him. Still refusing questionable deductions? Still recognizing questionable men? Henry almost smiled. Then he looked back at me. Why should my employees trust you? They shouldn't. The answer surprised him. They should examine the terms, ask difficult questions, and retain independent counsel. Trust should come after proof. He studied me for a long time. That sounds like something your father would say. My father trusted too quickly. So did you? Yes. The word no longer embarrassed me. I did. Henry's board met privately 3 days later. The discussion lasted 9 hours. 2 directors opposed the deal. 1 resigned. The lenders demanded additional collateral. An old client agreed to guarantee part of the financing after reviewing our evidence. Nothing happened easily. Real power does not arrive because someone gives a dramatic speech. It arrives through documents, objections, revised terms, and people willing to risk something beside you. The final agreement gave our investor group 53% control of Breyer and Rowe development. My Franklin Reserve funded only a fraction of the purchase. But it unlocked the rest. The account Daniel never knew existed became the first stone in the foundation of the company he wanted to command. Our purchase remained confidential until the merger reception. Henry continued negotiating with Claire as though nothing had changed. The board approved Daniel's executive employment agreement. Then it added a clause allowing immediate termination for fraud, dishonesty, or material misrepresentation. Daniel signed without noticing the revision. He was too focused on the title printed beneath his name. Chief Operating Officer. He had spent years wanting authority that did not depend on being my husband. He finally received it. For a few minutes. Naomi also negotiated the purchase of Martin's most vulnerable loans. He did not know I was behind the acquiring entity. Martin had overextended himself. When one of his lenders demanded repayment, he quietly sold several notes at a discount. Those notes included the second mortgage on the Northbridge estate and the debt secured by Daniel's shell company payments. We did not purchase everything. The title was never meant literally. But by the week of the reception, I controlled the company Daniel intended to run and the debt beneath the house where he intended to live. His salary. His office. His estate. His borrowed future. All of them now depended on decisions carrying my signature. My real signature. With a small slash beneath the final letter. 2 days before the reception, Claire found the executive binders in Daniel's study. I knew because I heard the argument from the main hallway. I had been coordinating the lighting company when a glass shattered behind the closed doors. You were going to leave me responsible for everything, Claire said. Daniel answered too quietly for me to hear. Then she shouted. I signed those documents because you told me we were protected. You signed them because you wanted the company. You brought Martin into this. You needed his money. I needed time. You needed my wife to die. The hallway seemed to lose air. Daniel had said it. Not as a confession. As a weapon. The door opened suddenly. Claire stood there, breathing hard. Her eyes met mine. For the first time, she did not look past the resemblance. She looked directly into it. "Everyone out," she said. The lighting crew stopped. "Leave the equipment. Go." The contractors exchanged confused glances and moved toward the service entrance. I remained with my clipboard. Claire waited until the hallway emptied. Then she looked at me. "Come into the library." Daniel appeared behind her. "No." Claire turned. "I was not asking you." She closed the library doors. My father's cabinet stood beneath the window. The photograph of Claire and Daniel had been removed. My wedding ring still hung from her neck. Claire remained standing. "Take off the glasses." I did. Her face changed. Not shock this time. Recognition. Complete and undeniable. "Evelyn." Daniel looked toward the door. Claire laughed softly. It was not amusement. It was the sound of a person realizing the floor beneath them had never been attached. "You knew," she said to him. "I suspected." "You knew." "I was trying to handle it." "You let her into this house." "You hired her." "Because you lied to me." They began speaking over each other. I watched the partnership collapse in front of me. Daniel accused Claire of moving company assets without authorization. Claire accused him of creating the forged power of attorney. He blamed Martin. She blamed Daniel's attorney. Each truth arrived wrapped in self-protection. Neither of them expressed regret for what they had done to me. Only fear about which one would pay for it. "Enough," I said. They stopped. It surprised all three of us. Claire's fingers closed around the ring. "How long have you been here?" "Long enough." "Were you recording us?" "No." "Searching our rooms?" "No." "Stealing documents?" "No." Daniel laughed bitterly. "Do you believe her?" Claire ignored him. "What do you want?" There it was again. The question guilty people ask when they assume everyone has a price. My house. My company. My money. My name. The house sale was legal, Claire said. No. I relied on documents Daniel provided. You signed a board resolution using forged medical certifications. He told me the doctors had approved them. I did not create those letters, Daniel said. Claire turned on him. You brought them to the meeting. Martin's lawyer prepared them. You said they came from the hospital. Daniel looked at me. She knew, Evelyn. Do not let her pretend otherwise. Claire's face hardened. And he was sleeping with me before your accident. Daniel went still. Claire smiled without warmth. He will tell you it started in the hospital. It didn't. I know, I said. That robbed the revelation of its power. Claire looked almost disappointed. He hated you, she continued. He said you humiliated him. He said the company was built on his relationships. Daniel stepped toward her. Stop. He said if you were gone, he could finally become the person you prevented him from being. Claire. He was planning this before the crash. I looked at Daniel. He did not deny the affair. He did not deny the resentment. But I had already learned the financial plan had been assembled after the accident. Claire was mixing truth with desperation. Did you plan to take the company before the accident? I asked. Daniel's eyes dropped. We discussed restructuring. While I was alive and working? You refused every serious conversation about succession. I was 58. You acted as if you would control everything forever. No. My voice remained calm. I acted as if my property belonged to me. Claire removed the ring from her neck. She placed it on the desk. I did not know he took this from the hospital. You knew it belonged to me. He said you would not recover. That did not make it yours. Her eyes filled, but the tears did not fall. I loved him. I looked at Daniel. He was already moving away from her emotionally, calculating what cooperation with me might cost. So did I said. Claire glanced toward him. The truth entered her face slowly. She had believed being chosen made her different from me. Now she understood that Daniel did not choose women. He chose opportunities. You were going to leave me, she said. Daniel exhaled. Claire, this is not the time. She picked up one of the binders and threw it across the desk. The pages struck his chest and scattered across the floor. You transferred the house debt. It was a protective arrangement. You made me personally liable. You signed the representations. Because you told me. She stopped. The expression on her face was almost identical to mine in the hospital when I learned the bank accounts were empty. For a brief moment, I saw not my enemy, but another woman standing at the edge of the same truth. Then I remembered that she had helped build the edge. You should both leave, she said. Daniel laughed. This is my house. No, I said. They looked at me. I placed my glasses in my bag. Technically, it belongs to the entity that holds the secured debt. Claire's face narrowed. What entity? You will receive formal notice after the reception. Daniel stared at me. What have you done? I picked up my cane. The reception will proceed as planned. You think we're going to host your ambush? Claire asked. You need the merger. There will be no merger. Yes, there will. Daniel's eyes changed. He understood before she did. Breyer and Rowe, he whispered. I did not answer. You bought into Breyer and Rowe. Claire looked from him to me. That's impossible. No, I said. It was expensive. Daniel followed me onto the terrace. Wind moved sharply across the water. You cannot do this, he said. I already did. With whose money? Mine. You did not have enough. I had relationships. The word struck him. His relationships had been one of the things he claimed built my company. But when he needed them, they existed only on invitation lists. When I needed them, people remembered contracts completed honestly, employees paid during difficult years and promises kept when no one was watching. Reputation is not what people say about you at dinner. It is what they risk when you call for help. What happens at the reception? He asked. You become chief operating officer. He stared at me. And then? I evaluate your employment. You cannot humiliate me publicly. I did not invite the press. Claire did. Then perhaps she should have considered whether the story was ready for publication. He stepped closer. His face looked tired now. Not the performative sadness he had worn at the cafe. Real exhaustion. Evelyn, I made terrible choices. Yes. I thought you were gone. I was in a hospital 7 miles away. They said you might never wake up. So you decided character no longer mattered because I could not witness yours. He looked toward the ocean. I was afraid. Of what? Being alone. The answer was probably true. That made it worse. You were so afraid of being alone, I said, that you abandoned the one person who could not leave. The reception began at 6:30 on Friday evening. By sunset, more than 100 guests had entered the estate. Valets guided cars through the circular drive. Servers moved between rooms carrying champagne. A string quartet played near the glass staircase. Projected company logos covered the wall where my father's cabinet had stood. Claire wore a silver gown. My wedding ring was no longer around her neck. Daniel wore a black tuxedo and the expression of a man attending his own execution while hoping the paperwork had been misplaced. They had not cancelled. They could not. Investors had flown in. Reporters had arrived. Briar and Rose Board was present. Martin's loans depended on the announcement. The performance had grown too expensive to stop. I remained in the service corridor wearing the dark suit assigned to senior event staff. Lillian adjusted the collar. "You don't look like a house manager tonight," she said. "What do I look like?" "Someone who knows where the exits are." She squeezed my hand. Theo stood nearby with a tray. Naomi had advised both staff members to leave before the legal notices were served. They had chosen to stay. Not for revenge. For their wages. People forget that dramatic confrontations still require someone to clean the glasses afterward. At 7:15, Henry Rowe took the stage. He stood beneath the new company logo, supported by one cane. Claire joined him. Daniel waited near the front beside Martin. Cameras lifted. Henry began with the history of Briar and Rowe. He spoke about endurance, responsibility, and the difference between growth and desperation. Claire's smile became tighter with every sentence. Then Henry announced that the board had approved a major recapitalization before completing the merger. Murmurs moved through the room. Daniel looked toward me. I was standing beside the service door. Henry continued. The recapitalization provides our organization with new leadership and controlling investment from a group with decades of experience in ethical development and architectural consulting. The screen behind him changed. The Mercer Strategic Design logo disappeared. A simple name appeared in white letters. Hart Row Group. The room became silent. Claire's face lost color. Henry looked toward the rear doors. It is my privilege to introduce our new controlling chair. I began walking. The distance from the service entrance to the stage was perhaps 40 feet. It felt longer than the hospital corridor where I had first relearned how to use my legs. Guests turned. Some recognized me immediately. Others saw only the thin woman with short hair walking through the room with a cane. A former client covered his mouth. One of my old directors stood so suddenly that his chair struck the floor. Daniel did not move. Claire watched me approach with the stillness of someone witnessing a ghost refuse its burial. I stepped onto the stage. Henry offered me his hand. I took it. "Good evening," I said. The microphone carried my voice through the house they had bought with my money. "My name is Evelyn Hart." No dramatic music followed. No one applauded. Truth rarely enters a room with applause. It enters through silence. I was involved in a serious road accident 5 months ago, I continued. During my recovery, documents were filed claiming I had surrendered control of my company and authorized the sale of my property. I looked toward the investors. Those documents were fraudulent. The screen changed again. Not to personal messages. Not to photographs from the affair. Only verified facts. The invalid notary license. The forged medical certifications. The false board notice. The backdated loan record. The shell company transfers. Each item had been reviewed by attorneys and independent experts. Naomi stood near the side of the room with representatives from the lenders and corporate counsel. This evening's transaction will not absorb assets obtained through fraud, I said. It will restore legitimate client agreements, protect employees, and preserve Breyer and Rose operating business under new control. Claire stepped toward the microphone. This is defamation. Naomi approached the stage. It is the subject of sealed court filings and preservation orders already served on the relevant institutions. Martin moved toward an exit. 2 investigators waiting near the door asked him to remain available for service. They did not place him in handcuffs. This was not a raid. It was more frightening to people like Martin. It was paperwork. Paperwork could follow him into every bank, boardroom, and property registry he depended on. Daniel finally spoke. Evelyn is recovering from a traumatic brain injury. His voice carried without a microphone. She is not competent to control a transaction of this size. The words moved through the crowd. He had chosen his final defense. The same one he had been preparing since the cafe. I looked at him. I expected you to say that. Naomi handed Henry a document. The screen displayed a short summary. 3 independent medical evaluations. A court-appointed neuropsychological examination. A judicial finding that I had full legal capacity to manage my personal and corporate affairs. The evaluation had been completed weeks earlier. Daniel's face changed. I continued. My competence was tested because my husband attempted to use my injuries to invalidate my voice. A reporter raised her phone. Daniel looked toward the cameras. Everything I did was based on the information available at the time. You signed my name. I relied on legal advice. You closed our accounts. To pay obligations. You told the hospital you could not assume responsibility for my care. His expression cracked. That was private. So was my coma. Claire took the microphone. Daniel brought me the documents. The betrayal between them became public in one sentence. Daniel turned. Careful. No, she said. You be careful. Her voice shook, but she continued. He said the power of attorney was valid. He said the doctors had confirmed she would never recover. You signed the filings, Daniel replied. Because you prepared them. You moved the client contracts. For the company we were building together. You built the shell companies. At your direction. They began dismantling each other before anyone asked them to. Greed had made them partners. Fear made them witnesses. I stepped away from the microphone. I did not need to interrupt. For months, I had imagined confronting them with perfect words. But the most powerful thing I could do was allow them to speak. People reveal themselves completely when blame becomes more valuable than loyalty. Henry waited until their voices faded. Then he addressed the board. The merger resolution before us has been revised. Legitimate assets and employees will transfer into Hartrow Group. Disputed assets are excluded pending judicial review. The board secretary read the resolutions. The first approved the recapitalization. The second appointed me controlling chair. The third activated Daniel's executive employment agreement as part of the revised transaction. He looked at me in disbelief. For a brief legal moment, Daniel Hart became chief operating officer of a company I controlled. The title he had stolen my life to obtain was finally his. Henry read the next resolution. Termination for cause, effective immediately, based on material misrepresentation, breach of fiduciary duty and failure to disclose financial conflicts. The board voted. 9 in favor. 1 abstention. None opposed. Daniel's employment lasted 11 minutes. I did not say, "You're fired." I did not need to. The secretary recorded it. The board confirmed it. His access credentials were disabled before he left the room. That was more real than any dramatic sentence I could have delivered. Daniel walked toward me after the vote. Guests moved aside. His face was pale. "You planned all of this?" "No." I glanced around the estate. "You planned most of it." "I changed the ending. This company was supposed to be mine. It was never yours. I gave you 30 years. You gave me what you chose to give. That did not purchase what belonged to me." His eyes filled. For the first time, I believed the emotion was real. But grief can be genuine without being innocent. "You're taking everything," he whispered. I looked at the rented artwork, the mortgaged walls, and the people he had deceived. "No, Daniel." My voice remained low. "I'm separating what was yours from what you stole. And what is left?" "That is something you should have asked before the accident." Claire stood alone near the staircase. The silver gown no longer looked elegant. It looked heavy. She held my wedding ring in her palm. When I approached, she extended it to me. "I should have returned this." "You should never have taken it." I believed him. "You also ignored every fact that made believing him convenient." She closed her fingers around the ring. "What happens to me?" "That depends on what you tell the truth about." "You want me to testify against Daniel?" "I want you to testify truthfully." "And if I do?" "I am not the prosecutor." She looked across the room at him. Daniel was speaking urgently to Martin's attorney, already searching for another arrangement. Claire saw it too. Even now, he was not looking at her. He was looking for an exit. "I thought he chose me," she said. "He chose access." The words were not cruel. They were the truth I had once needed someone to tell me. Claire placed the ring on the table between us. "I am sorry." I looked at her. "For the affair?" "For all of it." "Those are different apologies." She lowered her eyes. "I know." I picked up the ring. It felt lighter than I remembered. Perhaps because the promises attached to it were gone. "I may forgive parts of what happened someday," I said. "But forgiveness will not alter the evidence." Claire nodded. That was the first consequence she accepted without argument. The reception ended before dessert. Reporters waited beyond the gates. Investors met with counsel in the library. Employees gathered in the kitchen, uncertain whether they still had jobs. I went downstairs and spoke to them myself. "The household positions will continue for 30 days while the property is reviewed," I said. "Everyone will be paid. References will be provided to anyone who chooses to leave." Lillian crossed her arms. "And you?" "I'm leaving tonight." "You own the debt." "That does not make this my home." She looked pleased by the answer. Theo raised his hand as though we were in a classroom. "Did you really work here just to watch them?" "I worked here because I needed information." "Was that all?" I thought about the long days, the polished rooms, and the ring around Claire's neck. "No," I said. "I also needed to know I could enter the life they built from mine and still recognize myself when I left." The legal process lasted 14 months. There was no single courtroom scene where everything ended. Real consequences arrived slowly. Motions. Depositions. Audits. Negotiations conducted in rooms with bad coffee and no windows. The sale of my childhood home was voided after the court found that the power of attorney had been forged. Northbridge Residential Holdings surrendered its claim. The bank restored the property title to my name. Some of the money from the joint accounts was recovered. Some was gone forever. Insurance covered part of the corporate losses. Settlements covered another part. Hart Row Group survived its first year. Not perfectly. We lost clients. We closed one office. I had to tell 32 employees that their positions would not continue. Winning did not protect me from causing pain. That was another difference between justice and fantasy. Justice can stop a wrong. It cannot make every innocent person whole. Martin Cole pleaded guilty to financial fraud and unlawful lending disclosures. Claire cooperated with investigators. She admitted falsifying board notices, moving client assets and signing records she knew had not been properly verified. Her cooperation reduced her sentence, but it did not erase it. The last time I saw her was outside a courthouse. She wore a plain gray coat. No makeup. No jewelry. She looked older. "So this is it?" she asked. "For us?" "Yes. I think it ended before either of us admitted it began." She looked down. "I used to envy you." "For what?" "Everything. The company. The house. The way people listened when you spoke. You could have built your own life. I thought taking yours would be faster." There was no excuse inside the sentence. Only recognition. I nodded. "It was." She looked at me. "But it cost more." Daniel fought every charge. He blamed Claire. Then Martin. Then the attorneys. Then my recovery. He claimed grief had impaired his judgment. He claimed our marriage had already ended emotionally. He claimed the money was intended to protect me. But bank records do not become sentimental under questioning. Signatures do not change because someone cries. He was convicted of fraud, forgery, and financial exploitation of an incapacitated person. I attended the sentencing. Not because I wanted to see him punished. Because for months, decisions about my life had been made in rooms where I was absent. I needed to be present for the final one. Before he was taken away, Daniel turned toward me. His hair had gone almost completely gray. "Did you ever love me?" he asked. It was the same question I had asked him in the cafe. "Yes," I said. He looked surprised. "Then how can you let this happen?" I held his gaze. Love is not an agreement to protect someone from the consequences of harming you. He looked away. That was the last private sentence we exchanged. I did not move back into my childhood home immediately. For several months, I could not enter the front hallway without remembering the sale document. The house had become evidence. Every room carried two histories. The life I had lived there. And the life they had tried to remove from it. Samuel advised me to sell. Naomi advised me to wait. Lillian came one Saturday carrying cleaning supplies and announced that grief was not permitted to own real estate. Together, we opened every window. We removed the furniture Claire had moved back during the legal dispute. We repaired the kitchen. Beneath the windowsill, my father's initials remained beside mine. The tiny carved letters were exactly where he had left them. No forged document had reached that deep. I eventually turned the upper floor into temporary accommodation for families whose relatives were receiving long-term treatment at St. Catherine's Hospital. I kept the downstairs rooms for myself. Ruth attended the opening. So did Melissa, Naomi, Samuel, Lillian, and several members of the Hart Row team. We named the program the Open Chair House. I chose the name because of the empty chair beside my hospital bed. No patient should wake up believing their absence has made them disposable. The wedding ring paid for the first year of the program. I did not melt it ceremonially. I did not throw it into the ocean. I sold it through an ordinary estate jeweler. The receipt was folded into an ordinary envelope. Some objects lose their power when you stop treating them like symbols. My body never returned completely to what it had been. My left hand still trembled when I was tired. I used a cane on long walks. Certain sounds and heavy rain made my shoulders tighten. Recovery did not end when the court ruled in my favor. There were nights when I woke believing I was still beneath the fluorescent light, unable to call anyone. There were mornings when I missed Daniel. Not the man he revealed himself to be. The man I had spoken to over coffee for 3 decades. The man who remembered how my father took his tea. The man who once drove 6 hours through a snowstorm because I was afraid before a surgery. Those memories were real too. Betrayal does not make every earlier tenderness imaginary. It simply forces you to accept that tenderness was not strong enough to govern the person who offered it. That was the hardest truth. Daniel had not been pretending every day of our marriage. He had loved me within the limits of his character. When those limits were tested, love lost. 2 years after the accident, I stood in the boardroom of Heart Row Group while sunlight moved across the city. Henry sat near the window, officially retired and unofficially unwilling to leave. Samuel attended by video from Maine. A new generation of architects presented plans for affordable housing near 3 regional hospitals. My name remained on the company. But it no longer felt like the most important thing I had recovered. I had spent months believing justice meant reclaiming everything that had been taken. The house. The money. The company. My legal identity. I did reclaim much of it. But the life I valued most was the one I built after I stopped asking whether betrayal had made me smaller. It had changed me. There was no reason to lie about that. I trusted more slowly. I read every page. I stopped confusing silence with peace. And I no longer believed forgiveness required reopening a door someone had used to carry pieces of my life away. People sometimes ask whether buying the company and controlling the estate debt made me feel powerful. For a few minutes, it did. Then the room emptied. The lights were turned off. The guests went home. And I was left standing inside a house that had never belonged to the people pretending to own it. That was when I understood. The real victory was not that I had bought Daniel's future. It was that he had failed to own mine. He took my money while I was unconscious. He sold my father's house. He gave my wedding ring to another woman and tried to reduce my living body to a legal inconvenience. But he could not make my silence permanent. He could not decide the final meaning of what happened to me. And he could not stop me from returning as someone even I had not met before. If someone stole your life while you were down, would you spend everything trying to rebuild the exact life you lost? Or would you build a new one they could never enter again? Tell me in the comments. Because sometimes surviving is not about getting your old life back. Sometimes it is about finally realizing that your life was never a thing another person had the right to sell.